Welcome back to This Week in Immigration. I'm Jordan Lapierre. This week we present a special episode, a discussion of the importance of the immigration issue to state and local officials. Over the last couple of years, state legislatures and county commissions have become increasingly places where major immigration issues of our time are debated. While immigration law is and continues to be a federal prerogative, states and counties are increasingly on the front lines of dealing with the issues. Our own Teresa Cardinal Brown sat down with the chairs of the immigration task forces of the National Association of Counties, Bill Truex from Charlotte County, Florida, and the National Conference of State Legislatures, Senator Mo Dennis from Las Vegas, Nevada, to discuss their interest in immigration, their work with the NACO and NCSL task forces, and why it's important that federal lawmakers hear from state and local officials on immigration issues.
Welcome back to This Week in Immigration. As Jordan said, I'm Teresa Cardinal Brown, and I am privileged to be here today with two leaders in their respective communities, state and local lawmakers, to talk about immigration. I'm here with Senator Mo Dennis, Democrat in the Nevada Senate, and Commissioner Bill Truex, who is Vice Chair of the County Commission of Charlotte County, Florida. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having us here.
So I wanted to talk to you about, because we talk a lot on This Week in Immigration, and you hear a lot, at least in the national level, about the immigration debate, but you guys deal with it at the state and local level. And the dynamic there is somewhat different. I know it's very influenced by the national debate, but I want to talk to you a little bit about both sort of how the issue is for you and your respective roles and responsibilities and geographic locations, but also how you are working within your organizations. Commissioner Truex, you are chair of the Immigration Task Force of the National Association of Counties, and Senator Dennis, co-chair for the Task Force for the National Conference of State Legislatures. So you're also working in those organizations on immigration at a national level. So Senator Dennis, let me start with you. What is your interest in immigration? How did you get started looking at this issue, and where does it come from for you?
Well, I represent an older part of Las Vegas, of where many immigrants actually get their start when they move to the Las Vegas area. My parents are immigrants from Cuba, so I'm very familiar with that issue. Many constituents who are immigrants, and when I first got elected to the legislature way back when. I was asked to serve on the task force with NCSL on immigration, so I've had an opportunity to also see some additional things there. I think it's such a critical issue for our states, this immigration situation that we're in. It could be a very positive thing if we could figure that out, but because of that, I'm just trying to help, especially constituents who are immigrants, and trying to just they're just like my parents. They're just looking for a better life for their families, and how can we help make that happen?
Commissioner Truex, what about you? What brings you to the immigration issue?
Well, it's interesting. I was actually tapped on the shoulder by one of the staff members at NACO and said, "We'd really like you to attend this meeting and get involved in immigration." And I just thought, wow, it's such a volatile issue. I don't know. And I went to this first meeting, and it was not a good meeting. And I thought, this can't be the way we work on this issue. And that's what drove me to really want to get involved. That and the fact that I live in a community that is laden with folks from all over the world. Now, most of them have a second home that's vacation. But when you start talking to them about immigration, coming to America, people that they know, and then a lot of the workforce, there is an immigrant workforce. I have a construction company. It's small, but a lot of our trade contractors have people from other parts of the world that work, in their businesses. And so I look at this as a real economic driver and problem that we need to fix, as well as a humanitarian problem. And so that's my interest, my drive. I think if we could focus on those two things, we could chip away at this in a very logical manner. And we need to, and you've heard me say this before, quit yelling over the top of one another and really work on the issue.
So let me follow up on that and say, for your community, you said you have, some immigrants in your community who are working. You have also people in your community who know immigrants. What do you hear when you talk to your constituents about this issue? What are they talking to you about? What areas do they have concerns about? What are their issues primarily?
They all have concerns about illegal migration. And so I say, well, let's focus on how we can change legal migration and look at our visa programs that are really antiquated. And they don't want open flow over the border, but they also know that we need workforce, that there's a crisis in other countries that has to be addressed, and how can we help those countries solve that root problem so that people aren't having to flee their own countries? Because I think in many cases, if they could figure out a way to stay and feel safe and make a living, they might do that. But if they still choose to come this direction, we need to have a way to work with the system to make it more user-friendly. I mean, I talked to a gentleman yesterday who it took him $20,000 to get his visa, and he's on an investor visa, so he has the ability to pay that. And I talked to somebody else working to get citizenship who had paid $40,000 to get through that process, and it was a 10 to 12-year process for them. That, to me, says that we have a system that's not welcoming, that needs to be looked at. But also our rhetoric has got to change in this country, because people that want to come here, I think they're worried once they get here how they're going to be treated. And I think the overall community is very welcoming to those folks. I think that the national media portrays the negative parts of what's going on, and there's not enough of the root at the root-based level in the communities of how these folks are really integrating and work in a community. And I want to borrow an example from the economic side of it that's from your neck of the woods, Senator, and that is at Caesar's Palace when we were out there. Matt Chase had done a tour with the general manager.
Matt Chase is the executive director of NACO, just for our audience. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. And so the general manager had said, we pay $19 an hour for people to come and do housekeeping and those types of things. We feed them 2 meals a day, and they have daycare available. They can't find people to work. And that's from your neck of the woods. In my neck of the woods, in industry, and this is why I try to point to people, this is an economic thing as well as humanitarian. The construction industry, ABC, which is Associated Builders and Contractors, estimates that there are 500,000 unfilled jobs in the construction industry. And the National Association of Home Builders estimates over 370,000. So somewhere in that mix, we know that industry's costs are going up, and affordability of housing is very tough for anybody in this country. So to be able to fix that problem, we need a bigger labor force, right? And it goes on to the medical industry, doctors, nurses, those types of folks, as well as lawn care, landscapers. So there's a number of areas economically we need assistance, and then we have to look at the humanitarian side of this problem too.
Senator Dennis, what about you? You mentioned that you have immigrants in your constituency. What are the issues that they bring to you, and what do you hear most about from your constituents when it comes to immigration issues?
So, people are just looking for a better life. So, talking about the economic side as well as the humanitarian side, I think, my parents came here because they needed something better. They were coming from a dictatorship and looking for a way to just provide for their families. And that's what I see in my community. As the commissioner mentioned, we're a tourist-based economy in Nevada, and we need workers. And that one of the things that at NCSL that we've done over the last probably 14, 15 years that I've been involved, 16 years maybe, is looking at this issue. What are the economic benefits to immigrants? I mean, we've looked. I mean, we've been to the border communities. We've been to the Fed. We've been to even Mexico City and met with their folks. And everything always comes back that we are going to need these immigrants as we move forward. I mean, we see what happened in Japan where they shut it down, and then all of a sudden now they don't have workers, they don't have people. They're looking at robots to take care of things. I don't think we can afford to do that here in this country. I think we need more people to step up and talk about the economic crisis that we're going to have if we don't get enough trained workforce. We've got kids here that we're educating that people just want to kick out. And yet we're spending all that money to educate them. And I've talked to the folks in Mexico. They would love to have them to come work in their industries. Educated workforce that they didn't have to spend a dime on. I think that we're just being short-sighted when we look at this issue and how we're going to find solutions to it. I think that in addition to the hotel industry, construction, and healthcare, and all those issues are all areas where, I mean, I think we were the epicenter of unemployment in the country. We were at 13.5%, and now we're like under 4%. It's hard, as was mentioned, it's hard to find people, and we pay, good wages. And as you mentioned, I mean, the hotels, they do get 2 meals. They get, child care. They get all kinds of benefits, but just trying to find enough people to fill those slots. And then on the humanitarian side, I mean, we as a country, what we want is more families, folks that can help in our communities that want to be involved. And the only thing I've seen is, immigrants want to be involved. They want to be part of our communities. And I think that just makes our communities better when we get them involved.
So Senator Dennis, since you've been sort of working with the NCSL task force, how have you seen the discussion over immigration evolve during your time frame, like from when you started to where it is now, both within your legislature and your state level, but also nationally?
So at the national level, when I first got on, it was interesting for me because I thought we needed to find a solution, but I'm always the kind of person that realizes that in order to find solutions, we all have to work together. So we have to listen to each other, and that NCSL task force gave us that opportunity. And I was working really close with Republicans and Democrats to try to figure out how we could come to some solutions. In that same time, and what I will say is we've seen folks be able to get information, to be able to get ideas and take them back to their states. For example, in Nevada, one of the big issues that we had is the immigrants, the undocumented immigrants were they had to get to work, they had to get to doctor's appointments, but yet they couldn't drive, or at least legally they couldn't drive. And so I was able to bring forth a bill that allowed them to get authorization to drive. And that's made it so that we know that they know the laws concerning driving, that they have to get insurance, that they get, and they don't have to try to, if they get in an accident, you have a lot of hit and runs where they just take off because they don't want to get caught. So we've seen those kind of things, but we've also seen economic, education, other things that help benefit immigrants and help benefit our communities. Back in Nevada, we've been fortunate. I think most states and local, I think, are the same way, is that we tend to work together to find solutions, unlike what we've seen in Washington, that sometimes they just don't want to listen to each other. And we've been able to do that. We've been able to work together, Republicans and Democrats in Nevada, to come to some solutions, whether it's, what can we do to help kids be able to get education, to get for further training so that we can use them, to, jobs. How do we create more jobs? And we know immigrants probably create the more jobs than anybody because they're just entrepreneurial in nature. So, we've seen some great things, and we've seen people be able to work together. And I think that one of the things that I've seen has been the key to all of this is generally when people have experience with immigrants, then they're willing to sit down. When somebody really doesn't have a personal experience with an immigrant, it makes it very difficult for them to have any kind of a discussion because they don't really understand the issue.
Commissioner, when you are back in your state, immigration is a big issue in Florida, has been for a long time. It tends to go back and forth. What are your conversations like with your colleagues, both in your community and other communities in Florida, on these issues? Have you seen an evolution in how the conversations go?
There's been a huge evolution, both at NACO's task force itself and I think in the state of Florida. We have a lot of Cuban immigrants in Florida, but we also have Haitian. We have folks from all over the world, Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Brazilians. I've had a lot of Brazilians in the area. And I think that when they start to interact, and it's as simple as the lawn care company that pulls up, most of those people are Hispanic in nature for most of the part, right? And that becomes a one-on-one understanding of, here are these people. They don't know if they're here legally or not. They do a great job. They get to know them. Then it's a personal issue. And just what the senator said, when you start finding that personal connection, people have a tendency to change how they talk about immigration. And I think that, my conversations with folks is they're always relaying personal messages. When we were at the border and we had that interaction of the lady who came across, single mom.
Yeah, please talk about your border trip. I was going to get to that, okay. but you and other members of the NACO Immigration Task Force recently went down to the border in Texas, right? El Paso. Correct. Talk about that visit and what you all saw and how you talked about it before and after.
Well, so my whole focus before was always on the economic side, and going to the border and actually going through the processing centers, visiting where they sleep at night, going over to Juarez, Mexico, and looking at that center. It really pointed out to me the humanitarian side much more deeply than I ever really understood. That personal visit, that conversation with a single mom from Guatemala. The two little girls came up and was giving all of us hugs. And another young lady who was probably in her early teens came over and thanked us for providing them food, which we had nothing to do with. It was the Mexican government that was making very good meals for them, actually. But the humanitarian side, we all basically broke down because it was so emotional to see what these people go through. And we still acknowledge that there's those that come to this country and they have ill will, or they're transporting drugs, or they're getting into human trafficking. Whatever their concerns are, that's not the majority of those folks that are coming here. And that's why I go back to what's the root problem that makes them want to flee their own countries. Because that is a huge commitment to spend 13, 14, 15 days getting to a border looking for a better life. And it's no different than back when they came across the ocean from Europe. And my family, I have an Irish and a French and a Sicilian background. It's a melting pot, right? But the point is that they all came here from somewhere else as well. And I really believe that border tour opened my eyes to that part of it, the human side, that when you don't have that personal experience, it's very easy to ignore.
So, Senator Dennis, you've talked a little bit about the NCSL task force. You've been with it for quite a long time. Tell me about how that task force has worked. You have members from all across the country. As you mentioned, Democrats and Republicans. It's evenly split. How does that work within the organization of NCSL, and where have you gone with that? What kind of issues have you tackled, and how has that how do you think that can influence the national debate?
Yeah, so we've done a lot over the last few years that I've been on, talking about border tours. We've actually been to the Mexican border. We've been to the Canadian border. We've been to, as I mentioned, the Fed to talk about economics. We've been to some of the communities that have large immigrants, such as in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and visited with some of those communities. Because we tend to talk about immigration being from Latin American countries, but in Las Vegas we have a lot that are coming from Asian countries. We have a lot from Pacific Islanders. So we've got a lot of different folks that are coming from. We have a large, it's starting to become larger Ethiopian population in Las Vegas. But with NCSL, we've tried to, and as also I mentioned, we went to Mexico City to meet with their foreign affairs folks, and that represent different parts, especially of the border areas. I think that all of these things have been great, and we've been able to have folks from both sides of the aisle that come and see and participate. And then when we have discussions, we're able to come up with different policies. We've come up with some policies that we recommend to the executive board for NCSL, the task force does, and from there we're able to communicate those with Congress, and as we meet with various individuals in the House and in the Senate. I think that's been helpful, because I think that has helped inform, and it's also validated some of the things that they actually have tried to do in the past, were things that we had been talking about and recommending, and then to see them actually follow through on some of those was great. And as things here happen all the time, you have a little bit of hope, and then it goes backwards, and then but I think that we've seen some great progress. And I have hope that we're going to get to something that will actually make a difference for our communities.
Commissioner Truex talked about the NACO task force. It's a little bit younger, newer. What is some of the work aside from the border tour that you all have done, and how do you see that moving forward?
Well, we were able to, this past year, put together some policies that actually got adopted by the full board, and that has been a work in progress. And so that's exciting, because, again, it's validating the task force, as well as bringing education to those that aren't as familiar with the issue. we all think we know about immigration until you really try to figure out what immigration looks like, and it's so deep and so complicated that it takes a lot of education to really get up to speed on it. The task force being new, we have made inroads into the White House. We have another meeting there today, and it will be my 4th visit to the White House on the issue. I got invited to the speech on immigration in the Rose Garden, and that was a surprise to me. But the other surprise was I had gone over to the Hamilton after the speech, got a phone call from the White House to go back over and meet with the Deputy Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, Mr. Kozer, and that was another validating point. I mean, we need to have those access points, and we need to be working on this issue on the Hill, knocking on Senator and Congressmen's doors, Congresswomen's doors. We have to keep pushing the issue as best we can and trying to find those common bonds and that common ground. And I believe that whether it's state legislature or county commissioners or cities, if we can work well together and we get common ground, that we can bring a lot of support to those that are working on this issue in Washington.
Yeah. So you both mentioned the work of the task force. How important do you think it is that Washington hears the voice of state and local officials on this issue?
Well, I think that it's critical because we're being forced to deal with issues at the local level that wouldn't be there if we had the federal policy in place. As I mentioned, we've had one of our states, the state of Utah, realized that they were turning down businesses coming to the community because they didn't have enough workers. And they came up with their own plan that they would register individuals that wanted to work and be there, and came up with a plan, but they needed approval from the federal government, and that just has never happened. And so our states are missing out on economic opportunities because we don't have a policy in place. In addition to other costs and things that come up that we have to deal with, that unfunded mandate type things that makes it very difficult for us. And then also on the safety issues, without having a way to allow people to be there safely, and then we can deal with, as was mentioned, there's a small percentage of folks that are a criminal element, but that's really minute compared to the other wonderful people that we have in our communities that have to live in fear each and every day, and so there's costs and things associated with our state and local governments that we need Washington to do something.
Yeah, Commissioner Truex, what about you from the county level? I mean, you're still constituents of these members of Congress too. How do you think important it is for them to hear from you all about the issues that the communities have?
I again think it's critical. I think that's a great way to put it. For my community, when you talk about the workforce problems that we have, out of 185,000 people, only about 40% of the population actually works. Because we're Florida, we're retirees, and I'm now approaching the average age, which has dropped significantly since I first moved there at the age of 28. But point being is that our workforce can't grow. Our young people are leaving the area to get college degrees or other things where there's bigger economic opportunities for them, and we don't have really a backfill in our community, whether it's construction or whether it's business related. And I think there's a lot of avenue in a lot of communities to improve our economic situations. But I think, again, if we're not explaining that in D.C., they're not necessarily going to understand to the degree that I think they should really be aware of.
So where do you think your work goes from here, Senator Dennis, with the NCSL task force? What are sort of the next areas or next things that you are looking to do?
So I think that there are some additional issues that are coming up now. I think the biggest issues now is just keeping an eye on what's happening here in D.C. We've had some additional issues that have come up over the last year or two that are concerning, and whether it's the census, that greatly impacts all the things that we do at the state and local level, to others. So right now we're continuing to share the information, the research that we've done, updating in a few areas, and just keeping an eye and making sure that that folks here in D.C. are understanding that when they do certain things, how that impacts what we do.
Commissioner Trix, what about you? What do you think the NACO task force goes next?
Well, we're going to continue to work on educating our membership on immigration with your assistance. And additionally, we're watching bills that are coming up and trying to make sure that we can bring a big voice to support these positive changes, some of the things that we're seeing right now. And I think that we have to continue to be present in Washington. And that's why I continue to come back here. I think that the representation of our county governments is very important to hear from, and we have to continue to work together to bring that forward, to make phone calls, to send emails, reach out to staff, because a lot of staffers we're finding don't really understand what the National Association of Counties is or is all about. And as we educate them, the lights start coming on about how we can be supportive to their cause if they'll let us. And if they'll let us sit at the table with them, we can help point out where, maybe certain legislation should be modified, and we can go advocate for that. And I think we have to keep advocating.
Yeah, well, from the Bipartisan Policy Center, I want to thank you both for allowing us to work with you over the last couple of years. We had a couple of reports that we issued, one looking at state laws from the NCSL database. If you haven't seen that, National Conference of State Legislatures does an annual report of laws introduced and passed at state levels relating to immigration, and it's pretty big. It's amazing how many laws are introduced and enacted at the state level every year on immigration. And with your task force, Commissioner, we look forward to continue working with you, hoping to educate your folks. Thank you both for being on the podcast today, and for traveling, especially you, Senator Dennis, from Florida and Nevada to come to Washington, D.C. and record this. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you very much.
We will be back in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please take a second to find us on Facebook by searching Bipartisan Policy Center or on Twitter at BPC_bipartisan. And don't forget to subscribe and leave your feedback on this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Bipartisan Policy Center. This episode of This Week in Immigration was written by Chris Ramon and myself and produced by Yafat Tawahara. That's all for now. Join us again next time on This Week in Immigration.